Hey everybody, Some Gadget Guy here, and we're continuing to play with the camera on the LG G3. I've already produced a full camera suite shooting HD video. Now we're going to look at some of the exact same tests that we did in the HD version, but now in glorious UHD video quality. Right off the bat in these daytime shots, we're just retaining a ridiculous amount of detail. And unlike shooting UHD on the G Flex or on the Galaxy S5, the optical image stabilization is continuing to help smooth out our frame and our scene just as well as it did while shooting HD. And I am pleasantly surprised to see that in these daytime shots, the G3's camera is actually doing a slightly better job of underexposing for the scene. There's less clipping in the brightest of the white petals here. And moving over to these blossoms on the tree, if you compare this to the same shot that we did in HD, it is doing a much better job of not clipping out detail in the brightest sections of these white flowers. There's far more information retained here in this shot, which is really exciting considering we're also dealing with 4 times the resolution. Now, I do notice that there's a subtle crop in on the UHD video. It doesn't seem to completely wreck the frame, but I do find that that's interesting. We do lose a little of the wide-angle lens on the G3. These flowers here, again, we're maintaining excellent color information. It's subtly underexposed from the HD version of the shot, and it's vibrant, well-saturated color information. We do seem to have the same problem with reds, though. When the scene is predominantly red, like these flowers here in direct sunlight, it's doing a better job than the HD version of this video, but we're still losing some texture information, some detail, some of the crispness in the shot as the saturation and red exposure are starting to overpower the camera sensor. Happily though, the laser focus system is still rock solid here as well. There is almost no focus hunting at all once you tap on the screen and lock focus on your subject, and the camera is rarely confused by objects in the foreground or in the background once you tell it to lock on. It's just wonderfully smooth and stable performance, and I'm really happy to see LG improving their focusing system because I think we get much better results out of this camera now. Also attempting a zoom test with the UHD video, I wasn't particularly surprised to see that there's not much zoom range, as the UHD video is already maxing out a good chunk of the resolution from the image sensor. It's a 13 megapixel image sensor, and UHD video is already the equivalent of an 8 megapixel image. So once you get beyond around 2x zoom, getting into 3x zoom, you're already losing quite a bit of information as you're just sort of software zooming out. And once you get to the 8x zoom, there's very little information still retained, and you can see how blocky and pixelated the video gets. You can get, like I said, you can get a decent bump out of 2x or 3x, but using the full 8x is going to be pretty destructive to the quality of the video. As with our HD tests, while shooting UHD video, it's still doing a phenomenal job of tracking movement entering and exiting your scene. And it stands as another great example of how this new focusing system does not get easily confused by objects in your environment. And also, as we can see with cars driving into and out of this frame, I think the UHD video is doing a better job of exposing for this brighter scene. We still clip most of the white cars driving through, but cars that have colors on them, I think, retain more of that color information than when we're shooting HD. For some reason, when this camera is shooting HD, I think it's overexposing more than when it's shooting UHD. And that might be an artifact of the camera software not being able to tweak the scene as much. It takes a lot more computing horsepower to shoot UHD video, but I actually think it results in better looking video. Another example, this yellow flower when we shot it in HD was almost purely clipped bright white yellow, and here we're retaining so much more information, color information and exposure information in all of the little nice textured crinkled petals on this flower. The UHD video not only has more dots on the screen, it seems to be doing a better job of exposing for those dots. Into an exposure test going from a dark scene to a bright scene and back. Even with the extra CPU overhead in shooting this video, we still see a very pleasant blooming effect going from dark to bright and from bright to dark. It's not as smooth as when we're shooting HD video. It definitely stutters just a little bit more making those transitions, but it's still almost Samsung quality good. Considering how much more horsepower it takes to shoot this high quality video, I think LG is doing an excellent job in managing exposure changes. images. So even though we're shooting 4 times the resolution of HD, you can't fix a smaller camera sensor. And I still think we have slightly unpleasant background blurring when we have busy backgrounds for our subjects. Objects directly behind your subject can still be pretty easily identified, and that can be a little distracting. If your eye starts exploring the rest of the frame, you can see some of those, that really busy texture, sort of a liney, edgy texture in the trees behind this bougainvillea blossom. And the same thing's happening here with this yellow flower, where directly behind the flower, you can very easily make out the shrubs and ferns behind it. And then the upper right-hand corner, and you can see how jittery and how liney those shrubs and trees are off in the distance. Unfortunately, there's not really much we can do to fix that until LG decides to move up to a larger image sensor. And now, once we start shooting low light conditions, we still see the same blooming, the same streaking from lights and headlights, but we can also see now that there's less active noise reduction happening. In this software, in this app, the camera just isn't quite able to shoot 30 frame per second UHD video and employ the same type of rendering and noise reduction filters. So we end up with a grainier, noisier image, but I will happily take a grainier, noisier image that stays at 30 frames per second than one that scales back to something like 15 or 20 frames per second like on HTC phones. And happily, even in low light conditions, we're still seeing that same excellent white balance approach. Again, I still think this should be a slightly more yellow scene than what LG is representing here, but this gets us really close to what this scene looks like in real life. And it's retaining an excellent amount of dynamic range, with the yellow light up in front of this creepy tunnel being very yellow, and then the blue lights going down the tunnel being very whitish blue. It makes me happy to see that color accuracy, and then it's also really exciting to see the cars driving in the freeway behind this scene not being just blurry streaks because we've reduced the frame rate. And again, in our walkway scene here, the light closest to me on the right is slightly whiter. The light farther away from me is slightly more yellow. That drives me crazy in real life. I really wish they were the same color, but the LG is doing a wonderful job of maintaining that color separation between two very subtly different lights. And here we can see this is a very noisy and grainy image while shooting UHD. It's not able to employ much noise reduction, but we're not scaling back the frame rate, and I will take that noisier image over a slideshow of 15 frame per second video. And lastly, just pushing the camera to its low light limits, this flower lit only by a porch light. And again, it's a busy, grainy, noisy image, but we're retaining wonderful detail in the flower, in the leaves behind it. And considering how we're pushing such a small image sensor to its absolute limits, I think this is actually pretty remarkable looking video. All in all, LG really needs to be celebrated with the updates that it's made to its camera sensor and camera app for the G3. And especially looking at all of these video samples, while I still think that you can get slightly more cinematic video out of a Galaxy S5 shooting UHD on a tripod, when you go handheld, the active optical image stabilization built into the G3 just presents us with a much nicer video shooting experience than what we currently have on Samsung. And if you're interested in shooting UHD video on your phone, well, right now, LG's really the only game in town. As always, folks, thanks so much for watching my videos, sharing my videos, subscribing to my channel, leaving me those amazing comments, because if you have questions on what LG's doing with their camera here, or any of the other phones that we've tested on Some Gadget Guy, how the camera performance stacks up against the competition, definitely drop me a comment below. I'm always happy to get into a chat about camera stuff. Hit that thumbs up button, and I will catch you all on the next review.